Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel, and Merry Christmas to all of you. I hope that you all gotten what you've wanted now that you're listening to this, now that Christmas Day is about over. Hope you had a great Christmas Eve. I know that's a common time for people, family to get together as well. Maybe friends and family get together. That's back in the day when I still lived around more of my family, that my aunt and uncle who lived just 1 yard away would have a party on Christmas Eve, and it wouldn't just be family, but a lot of friends. It was always a good time, and I think they continue to do that to this day. And then Christmas Day was more of just a family event, and that's the way it was for me until I left Pennsylvania. It wasn't until I moved to Las Vegas that Christmas becomes not just a family event, because when I went there, none of my family lived there. So it was more of a friends event. And you have a lot of people, for example, in Las Vegas, who moved to Las Vegas from somewhere else, from New York, Maine, Minnesota, Washington, Texas. And it's funny how then all those people, including myself, find each other and then end up spending some of these holidays together. Of course, for me, at least for 5 of the years that I lived in Las Vegas, I worked on Christmas and on Thanksgiving and on New Year's because I worked in entertainment, and the show never stops. In fact, the one show, the only day that it was closed was during the Super Bowl. It wasn't some official holiday. It was on the Sunday of the Super Bowl was the only day that show was dark out of 365 days of the year. So I spent a lot of Christmases and New Year's and Thanksgivings working. Of course, it really wasn't work. In entertainment, it's hard to call it working. But now that I live in Florida, I have a brother who lives very close to where I do. So we get to spend, and his wife get to spend that time together. And it's always a good time. So however you spent this holiday, I hope it was a good one. I remind you, as always, you can find my books at Amazon.com. Just do a search for Edward Dentzel there. You can download my books, my Govicide series, and my book Distant in a matter of moments. You can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. I have a lot of new Twitter followers, and I'm really excited about that. In fact, I want to talk about that in a little bit. You can go to edwarddentzel.com, where you can find all of my old Red State Talk Radio shows. Most importantly, you can go to edwarddentzel.com/book, where you can find a way to download the first chapter of my next book called The Comebacks, that'll be out sometime in 2016. A little sneak peek, if you will. It's not a short chapter. I give you quite a bit. That first chapter of the book, actually is the first day of the book, because the chapters are broken up into days. The first day of the book, a lot happens. I have to set a lot up. All the characters are introduced. And it'll give you a flavor of what the rest of the book will be like. And so you can download that and read it at your convenience. I hope you like it. You can also find my highlight reel, my promo video, at edwarddentzel.com. When you get there, you can just see the tab at the top. You can press on that and watch the video of me doing my show from a few months ago. It's kind of spliced, all put together. I put it together myself. You can also find my shows at Podbean, and SoundCloud and YouTube. You can also find it in the iTunes Store in the podcast section, and you can find me at LinkedIn and at YouTube. Going back to my Twitter followers, I realize that I have a lot of new people now listening to the show, and I'm very happy about that. So maybe I need to do a little explanation for all of you new people who I am, maybe a little bit what makes me tick regarding my conservatism and how I got started in all of this. Because right now, to a lot of you, I'm just Edward Dentzel, a voice coming out of your computer, out of your radio, out of your phone if you have the Red State Talk Radio app, which I hope you do. It's really cool. Whoever put that together, nice and simple app, easy to use. You should download it. It's for free, of course. I'm originally from Leechburg, Pennsylvania. I've been a conservative all my life, even though there was a time when I was young that I really didn't realize what conservatism meant. I can remember being in high school, being one of the few kids in my senior class that was willing to admit that he was going to vote for George Herbert Walker Bush, whereas most of my classmates were Michael Dukakis supporters. I can still remember to this day the teacher asking us to raise our hands. Well, if you can vote, and some of us were old enough to vote. I was 18 even before I started my senior year in high school. I can remember the teacher asking, who's going to vote for Michael Dukakis? And all these hands went up. How many of you, if you could vote or are going to vote, would vote for George Herbert Walker Bush? And just a few arms. I'm going to say it was maybe 2 or 3 arms went up, and mine was one of them. So as far back as that, I've been a conservative, a Republican in one way or another, even though at the time I couldn't explain probably to anybody why that was. And this is to this day why I don't take a lot of young people's political beliefs seriously. Because trust me, if I couldn't explain why I thought the way I did at 18, 19, 20 years old, then nobody else could. That's just the way I think about this. And really when it comes to political ideas and what people think, I don't start taking people seriously about really how they understand political theory and political issues until they get out into the workforce and start paying taxes, have to live on their own, and they have to start thinking about, you know what, if I don't make this work, then if I don't make my life work, then it's going to be a big problem. If you're not part of that, then I'm not going to take you seriously. Just kind of who I am. I was very fortunate to go to a conservative school. In fact, college. I talked about this about a month ago. My alma mater, Grove City College in Grove City, Pennsylvania, was voted one of the least friendly gay colleges in the United States. That's a true story. In fact, it has gotten number 1 in the last couple years, but I think for this past year, I forget which school passed it up. It was like number 2, which is really weird. And I talked to a friend of mine about this when I saw that, and he had the same recollection that I did, that I don't even remember us thinking about gay issues when we were at Grove City. That was not even, granted, that was 20-some years ago. But I don't remember any gay bashing going on there. I don't remember anything like that at all. So I don't know how these lists are all put together. I think probably the reason that Grove City gets put in that category is because it is a conservative school. It teaches conservative principles. You go to the economics department, you're going to learn a lot about free trade. You're going to learn a lot about Austrian economics. You're going to learn a lot about the Laffer curve and low taxes and stuff like that. You're not going to learn Keynesian economics. You're not going to learn anything about stimulus packages or anything like that. You're just not. That's not what they do there. And the other, it's a tough school. Let's just put it that way. Every discipline that you can go into at that school is going to be more difficult than any sort of education you're going to get anywhere else. Engineering, teaching, business, music, whatever the case may be, it is difficult. And they pride themselves in being like that. A little too much, in my opinion, but that's where I went. And I still hold on. I can tell you, I still have books in my personal library from college that I used in some of those classes. I have them to this day. And you'll find me every once in a while, I will go back to them to read them, to brush up on something that I may talk about on this show. And so ever since then, slowly been building my conservative repertoire. Repertoire, which is a French word which I don't use too often. And to the point where when I got to Las Vegas, when I moved to Las Vegas, I found myself in a situation going into an entertainment in Las Vegas, doing some acting, doing some stage managing here and there, that you find yourself around a lot of liberals a lot of the time. And sometimes in those jobs, you have a lot of downtime and politics is going to pop up. And so when you hear me talk about an issue, even though most of what I talk about are new issues regarding Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, terrorism, ISIS, the Taliban, on and on and on, the basis for all those arguments were really formed in those years where I could not avoid my liberal coworkers, and we would have discussions and arguments about topics of the day. So I was working, 4 days a week, 5 days a week in these jobs, and then later 6 days a week, 7 days a week later. That's true, 7 days a week. Is where I began to kind of form what I do, what you now hear on this show. So unlike somebody like Ben Carson, where it sounds to me like his arguments are formed in his own head in the middle of the night when he has nobody else to talk to. The arguments that I use have been battle-tested against liberals over a succession of years. And I take great pride in that. This is not, although I enjoy theory, what you hear me talk about is the exact kind of arguments and the basis for what I've been using for years, crafted on what I learned in those years. And I would say in the early 2000s is probably where I began to really understand why I was conservative and really, really be able to defend it. It takes time. It takes time. And of course, as you would realize, I got quite a bit of a reputation. And frankly, probably among my friends and people who knew me well, I probably had a reputation even before that of being at least a little bit argumentative and and picking out something that somebody's telling me and parsing it to death and showing how they're inconsistent. That was kind of how I was known anyway up until that point. And I think probably that continues to this day, even though I think that I'm a really laid-back, nice guy. So I wanted some of you to know where all of this comes from. I didn't just wake up yesterday. I'm not a guy who was a liberal until he was 35, then woke up one day and had an epiphany. That is not me. Although I realize that there are people who lead conservatism now who are like that. They were once liberal and who are now conservative. That's not me. I've just been with it since the beginning. I think the difference for me, in contrast to most conservatives' adult lives, is that I've been surrounded by liberals for most of it. And really that didn't change until I moved to Florida. And really it's just because here I have a little bit different lifestyle than I did in Las Vegas. The truth is, Las Vegas isn't even that liberal of a place. I know it's Democrat, but it's certainly not San Francisco. Let's put it that way. It's certainly not New York City. It's certainly not Chicago. But when you're involved in entertainment in Las Vegas, just like entertainment in Hollywood, just like entertainment on Broadway, you're going to have mostly liberals and usually mostly kooky liberals. And so that even provides a better atmosphere, I think, that a person can hone his or her conservative credentials. And of course, is that the way I look back at it now, all those arguments that I had over those years, I don't think I lost one of them. I really don't. I really don't. I was always prepared, and it was always 2 against 1, 3 against 1, and it could go on all day. Especially, of course, after September 11th, and we started going into Afghanistan and Iraq and the military. It was interesting. It really was interesting. And I did have some coworkers who were conservative. In private, they would come up to me and say, "Hey, Ed, I was listening to what you're saying. That was really, really good." But they weren't the kind of people to confront these liberals like I was. They just weren't. Instead, they just kind of cheerleaded in secret. And that was fine. Everybody has their role, I guess. And then I started doing podcasting back in the late 2000s, and then I got onto Red State Talk Radio in June of 2014, and I've enjoyed it ever since. So, for all of you who are new to the show, that's a little bit of my political background. Unfortunately, I will admit, having voted for John McCain in 2008, and I'll admit voting for Mitt Romney in 2012, I can tell you that in 2016 I will not make the same mistake. I think I've compromised my values enough. It's about time that some of these politicians compromise their values for me. So I'm going to tell you, the closer we get to the finale of this Republican nomination process, and if it's somebody that I don't like or I think would be bad for the country, even if he or she is a Republican, I'm going to tell you, I won't vote. I can't tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Because I do believe that change starts with the self. What is that? I guess it's usually connected to like liberal thought. Be the change you want to see in the world. I guess what I plan to do is something along those lines. There are candidates who I will not vote for. I will show up to vote. I just won't vote for president. I've learned my lessons. I feel like it's bothering my conscience. Let's put it that way. It just is. This is the exact reason, for example, I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. It's the exact reason I haven't watched Pittsburgh Steelers games this year. You put a dog killer on my team, my Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm not going to watch. I'll follow them. I'll see the highlights. I'll listen to a couple podcasts regarding the games afterwards. But that's just kind of the person that I am. And I think that's been, I think that shows up in my personal life, being that I'm still single at 45. If I can't really date the kind of women that I want to date, then I'm just not going to date. I'll just pull out of the whole dang thing for now. So that's a little bit of insight into me. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about heavy metal music over the course of this show. You're going to hear me talk about my parents, who are going to be here in a few days for 3 months, which should be fun. I'm going to be talking about my family, the rest of my family, my friends, a guy who originally got me into politics back when we were at Grove City, who's a good friend of mine to this day. This is what you're going to hear on the show, and I just wanted you to know where this all comes from. I just don't want me to be some two-dimensional or one-dimensional character that you just happen to turn on Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern on Red State Talk Radio. I'm a real guy. I go out, I hang out at Starbucks. I do a lot of my book work and editing at Starbucks. I do a lot of studying for this show at Starbucks. I try to get out, although I can be a very private person working at home as well. I'm into disc golf. I love watching YouTube videos regarding mysteries and unsolved and disappearances. Been watching a lot of gun videos recently. Just the kind of guy I am. So hopefully that provides a deeper picture into who Edward Dentzel is, this guy you hear running this show called the Dentzel Domain that has actually existed since about 2000, I'm going to say 8 or 2009. when I came up with the name for this show. So let's move on to something else. I'm not going to get into too deep of politics on Christmas. That doesn't seem right to me. We can get to that next week. So I'm going to start off with this little morsel of a story. I saw this poll saying that Americans still do not consider Die Hard to be a Christmas movie. I take great exception to this. Die Hard, whether it's a Christmas movie or not, is still one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a fascinating movie to me. So well done. Most people don't realize that it was originally a book. And unfortunately, I forget the name of the book right at this second. But it was originally a book that was then turned into the movie. And the book was actually a sequel to the book called The Detective, which was a movie in the 60s that starred Frank Sinatra. Most people don't realize that. So, Die Hard to me is a Christmas movie. I'm going to make the argument this way. That plot does not exist without it taking place on Christmas. Remember, the reason that John McClane's wife and all those people are in that Nakatomi building is for a Christmas party. It's Christmas Eve. If it's not Christmas Eve, the plot doesn't exist. They're home for the day by that time. And in fact, the reason that the terrorists or the bank robbers, led by Hans Gruber, chooses that particular day is because he knows that all of those people are going to be there and he can use them as hostages. And the reason they're there, once again, is because it's a Christmas party. Now, how isn't that a Christmas movie? Why? Because it's not about Santa, it's not about reindeer, and it's not about presents. Without it being Christmas, that plot doesn't take place. The movie just doesn't happen. And do you forget all the Christmas decorations that are in there? And the reason that John McClane is going from New York out to LA is not just for any reason. He's going out there to be with his family for Christmas. It is a Christmas movie. I don't get it. I know Americans, they think of it more as an action movie. That's the genre of movie that it falls into. But it's a Christmas movie. It's a movie about family, right? It's about the bank robbers, the / terrorists who want to get rich on Christmas. They want to give themselves their own kind of present. No. What's interesting about that movie is, came out in 1988. And one of the questions that John McClane, when he gets there, he talks to Mr. Nakatomi, the guy who eventually gets his head blown off. He says, I didn't know they celebrated Christmas in Japan. And remember, this was right on the cusp of all that Japanese craziness in the United States. Japan's going to take over the United States. Remember that? If you're too young to remember that, of course you can't. But if you're older like I am, you remember it. And it just seems you watch that movie and that's a question that seems so weird now. You'd never see that in a movie today. Some action movie that is based on Christmas and a character saying to some Japanese person, I didn't know they celebrated Christmas in Japan. Just wouldn't see it today. And that just shows you, it kind of dates it maybe at least a little bit. But it is a Christmas movie, people. Christmas movie. Speaking of Christmas movies, here are some of my other favorite Christmas movies. I'm not much of a stickler for the old ones. Miracle and what's it called? 34th Street or whatever that movie's called. Never saw it. It's a Wonderful Life. I'm going to be honest with you. Big Jimmy Stewart fan, being that he grew up not far. Granted, he's way older than I am, and he's dead now. But he grew up not far from where I grew up. I grew up in Leechburg, Pennsylvania. He's from Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is about 40 minutes away. In fact, I think there's a statue to him in town. But I'm a Jimmy Stewart fan, especially in his Alfred Hitchcock movies. Do you believe? I've never seen It's a Wonderful Life. Never saw it. Not interested. Couldn't even tell you the year. I know it's in black and white. I know it was sometime in the 40s. Couldn't tell you the year that it came out. But I love Rear Window, and I love some of his other movies. Rope was another one with Alfred. He was in with Alfred Hitchcock. It's a Wonderful Life. Never saw it. Some of my favorite Christmas movies, and I think this is maybe an indicator of my age. Die Hard, of course. Lethal Weapon. Most people don't realize that Lethal Weapon, it's kind of a Christmas movie too. Remember the Officer Murtaugh's house has the Christmas lights on it. Remember that? Remember when Gary Busey he's in the house and the police car comes crashing into the house. What's it run into? Christmas tree. Remember what I think one of those movies, It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, one of those movies is on the TV when the police car crashes in there and Gary Busey swears at the TV about it being Christmas. That's a Christmas movie too. I know you think I'm crazy regarding all this. But Lethal Weapon, Christmas movie. The ending of the movie where Mel Gibson and Gary Busey get out into the fight in the yard, that takes place on Christmas. It's a Christmas movie. Some other movies. Probably my favorite, though, and it's a true Christmas movie, is A Christmas Story with Ralphie and his BB gun. I could watch that movie over and over and over. In fact, I know that I'm not alone regarding that. I know that there are TV stations that today, TNT and TBS, that played that movie over and over and over and over. And I'm one of those guys, kind of the perfect age. He's 9 years old in that movie. I was 12 or 13 when that movie came out. Perfect age for that movie. Of course, it takes place in about 1940 or something. But all of the great lines, an iconic movie. It's probably my favorite Christmas movie. Christmas Vacation, maybe that's an easy one. It's not the best of the vacation movies. I think that the original National Lampoon Vacation with Anthony Michael Hall is the son, and from the early 80s, I think is still the best one. I like Vegas Vacation too, but once you live in Vegas, that movie kind of loses its luster. But I think Christmas Vacation is a very funny movie. You know another movie that is a Christmas movie? Of course, it takes place over the course of about a month or about that, but I consider it to be a Christmas movie. It's kind of a Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's movie. Trading Places, which is a movie that I watched recently. I have that on DVD. That's a Christmas movie as well. Love that movie. Remember all the Christmas decorations that are in it. If you watch that movie, you'll see them. Great movie. Still a hilarious movie to this day. Jamie Lee Curtis, so sexy in that movie. Does a great job, of course, as an actress too, but I don't think they could have picked a better woman to play her part in that movie. Eddie Murphy, when he was still doing great movies, good movies. Great Christmas movie. Dan Aykroyd, just getting started in his movie career. He went on to do a lot of great movies, funny movies. The Ghostbusters, of course, in particular. Just a great movie. Great Christmas movie. And then we'll get a little bit of a kids movie in here. We need to get a little bit of a cartoon animation in there. Probably my favorite of that genre is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I can remember just as a little kid watching that. And in fact, if you really want to know, I have that movie on DVD as well. Just something about the what do they call that? Stop motion animation? Isn't that what they call that? And just a great story. Cornelius, the big monster, and he pulls all his teeth out, and the elf, what is his name? Hermie or whatever his name is. He wants to be a dentist. I mean, what a fantastic story. And to me, it's kind of held up to the test of time. That's another one of my favorite Christmas shows / movies. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
You're listening to Red State Talk Radio, America's premier conservative talk radio network.
You critics don't define our honor. You try to shame us for doing our job. You teach children to fear us, crowds to attack us, and good people to doubt us. But we will never back down from our sworn duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. We wake up every day, put on our badge, strap a gun to our hips, kiss our families goodbye, and put our lives between the law-abiding and any criminal who threatens their rights. We serve people of every color and creed, men, women, and children in violent, dangerous neighborhoods, because they have the same right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as CEOs, movie stars, and the political elite. We are Americans, and we are the American police officer. We stand with the National Rifle Association of America, and the NRA stands with us. Together, we're freedom's safest place.
I know. We Christians are just as bad as Muslims who fly planes into buildings and video themselves sawing people's heads off and beheading kids and mutilating women and shooting people who draw cartoons. That's right. You better be just as wary of us Christians, because we don't mess around. Don't be insulting our Jesus, because you think Muslims are bad. Oh, man, don't push us. You think the Muslims are bad when they prey on people for insulting Muhammad? You're really going to get it when Christians pray for you for insulting Jesus.
It could be easy to take what we have for granted and not appreciate everything the men and women of law enforcement do for us every day. So to all my heroes out there, I just want to say thank you.
Thank you for protecting my family,
my business,
my kids,
our community.
Thank you for listening to us,
for being there for me, for keeping me safe.
To all those in law enforcement, thank you.
This is Primo Mondoni, host of the Red State Town Hall. Join me Sundays at 11 p.m. Eastern on Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. So, lock it in and rip the knob off.
This is Paul Preston, host of Agenda 21 Radio. Join me Monday through Friday on Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. So lock it in and rip the knob off.
We are back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. Let's get into a couple political topics in the last 20-some minutes of the show. Don't want to go too deep. Don't want to hit this too hard. You don't want to hear it on Christmas. Like I said, we can get into the hardcore making fun of liberals again next week. And that's why I try to do the first part of the show a little lighter fare than you're normally going to get at the Dentzel Domain. But I want to talk about Rand Paul. He made the statement this week that he is not going to go back to the kids' table regarding these debates. He refuses to go back to the earlier debate, which doesn't get as big a coverage, doesn't get as good a ratings, and it's kind of like the loser table, which really kind of it is. Especially considering that this last debate on CNN was the third highest rated debate. It had 18 million viewers, and that's still only, 2/3 of what the first debate got, I believe. Maybe even less than that. But that debate, if you don't know, maybe I should tell all of you this, if you don't know. That debate, the GOP debate, was the highest rated, Nielsen rated program last week. even got higher ratings than Sunday Night Football did. That's something. That's surprising. I have to tell you, surprising. And maybe it's not surprising that the Dem debate and the rating that it got is not even close. That shouldn't be any surprise either. I think that's a good sign. People are interested. People are tuning in. Donald Trump will tell you it's because of him that they're turning in. Well, they're not watching as much as they used to, Donald. So does that mean they're less interested in you too? But to get 18 million viewers this far into the political process after how many debates they've had already is a good sign. It's better than them only getting 1 million viewers, and you'd hope that they'd get more viewers, but it's all for the ratings, as I've told you, and I'm not sure what people really get out of it. I'm not sure that there's been a recent debate where people have decided to pick one person over another, even if it's just in the nomination process. But Rand Paul, I feel for Rand Paul. I don't know if I would like him if I personally met him. I don't know. I think that I can reasonably say that if I met Ted Cruz, probably like him. Marco Rubio, probably like him. Both of those guys are around my age, so maybe would have some things in common. Rand Paul does seem to be outside of Donald Trump, I guess, the most unique of the people up on that stage if you look at the last debate. And I think what is hurt, and I think sometimes that would be helpful because you're kind of different, and that's going to attract its own kind of people. And of course, Rand Paul can be somewhat helped by the infrastructure that his father Ron Paul had, although I'm no fan of Ron Paul by any means. I believe he's an egotist extraordinaire. Seems like his son is a little bit different not totally different than that, but a little bit different than that. I think, though, that if they're going to, and I predicted this after this past debate, that I think at some point they're going to have to cut this down. That these elections, Iowa's coming up very fast, and to continue to have 9 people on the stage when some of them are polling in the low single digits doesn't, even in Iowa, doesn't make a lot of sense. It just doesn't. It made sense in August, maybe in September, but the closer you get to the point where people start casting votes, the less sense it makes. And Rand Paul knows that. He knows what his poll numbers are. And I guess what he's saying is if he can't be on the big stage, then he's just not going to do the debates. I guess that's a choice. Or is he saying that he's going to drop out? In my opinion, Rand Paul has no one to blame but Rand Paul. Hey, I thought he did a fine job in the last debate. His issue is that on foreign policy, at least on the Republican side, he is somewhat out of step. He's not crazy out of step like his father was, and just plain wrong, but where he is regarding ISIS and terrorism and America's influence in the world is not where the American people are. Neither Republicans and maybe not even a lot of Democrats. That's part of his problem. And I personally don't agree with his position, just so you know. But domestically, he's not in step either. It's like he's wildly to the sides of where a multitude, millions of Americans are. So he's somewhat isolationist regarding ISIS and all of that. Not totally isolationist, but somewhat compared to the rest of the guys and Carla Fiorina on stage. But then that to me is kind of a leftist policy, if you don't mind me saying. Whereas his economic policy, his domestic policy, is far to the right of where Americans are right at this second. And I will have you know that I agree way more with his domestic attitude than his foreign attitude. And I'm willing to admit that my domestic policy, if I were running for president, would probably be closer to Rand Paul's than to any of the others on stage. I'd like to think, though, that I could sell it better than Rand Paul has. And that's why I get back to, if Rand Paul wants to blame anybody, it's Rand Paul. The truth is, he didn't start this season out very well. It seems since the beginning that he's been spinning his wheels, and then it didn't help that he got to that first debate and didn't have the right attitude, came across as being a little snarky, maybe didn't get enough time. Maybe he's thinking that as well. There was a lot of complaints early on about people not getting enough time on stage. Given how many you had on stage, it's no wonder. So he kind of hurt himself from the beginning, and he's been trying to overcome that ever since. And even with Scott Walker dropping out, Rick Perry dropping out, Bobby Jindal dropping out, it hasn't helped him at all. None of those supporters for those guys would naturally go over and to support Rand Paul. Just not a natural fit. The people who supported those three guys who dropped out are more likely going to go to Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, maybe Chris Christie, maybe Ben Carson, certainly not Donald Trump, but Rand Paul isn't going to be any of those people's first choice. A Bobby Jindal supporter is not going to go over to Rand Paul. That's just not going to happen. Even though I realize in all three of those cases, those guys dropped out. The reason they dropped out is because they didn't have a lot of support in the first place. And in Scott Walker's case, that was sad to see. So if Rand Paul, all these months later, is complaining about just barely hanging on to the main stage, his fault. Just hasn't run the kind of campaign that you would have thought he could have. You want to blame it on Donald Trump. You want to blame it on just the wave of politics kind of being against Rand Paul, both domestically and in foreign policy. Okay. But I hope, though, that he sees that. I hope that he doesn't try to blame that he can't stay on the main stage because of something that the networks did, something that the party did, or the RNC did, or any donor did, or anything like that. That's not the way I see it at all. He's had as good a chance as anybody to make himself more relevant in this race, and he hasn't done it. He hasn't done it. The truth is, it's somebody like Carly Fiorina, even though it seems to me that if there's even a bigger question as to why Rand Paul hasn't been more popular, then you got to look at Carly Fiorina. It's even a bigger puzzle there because she seems to win every debate, except maybe for this last one. She seems to do well in every debate, but it hasn't translated to her numbers going up. That's interesting to me. And that's why I continue to say maybe these debates don't mean as much as everybody thinks they do. Because if you can seemingly win them, quote unquote, there is technically no winner. This is an election. It's just polls those don't mean anything, but winner, quote unquote, winner. You'd think that should be able to raise more money, get more infrastructure for her campaign, start knocking on doors in Iowa, knocking on doors in New Hampshire, and that hasn't happened. Her numbers haven't changed at all. In fact, they seem to be going down. For me, personally, what I think is that the reason she hasn't caught on is because maybe some people have figured out that Well, she talks a good game. Seems like a quality woman, a quality person. But some people question her true conservative bona fides. And there's that time at Hewlett-Packard that continues to haunt her. A lot of people have come out and said that those years at Hewlett-Packard were the worst years to be at Hewlett-Packard when she was the CEO. That doesn't help. Even if all of those people who are saying that are liberals, are Bernie Sanders supporters, it's going to hurt. So if either one of them get kicked off the main stage, because the talk now is narrowing it down to 6 people instead of the 9, that Carla Fiorina and Rand Paul have the very real possibility of being kicked off. Who's it going to be? It's going to be Trump, Carson, Cruz, Rubio, Jeb Bush, and Chris Christie. That's who the 6 are going to be. And Kasich, Fiorina, and Paul are going to be dropped off. And the reason Christie gets to stay on there is because, why? He's shown a little life there in New Hampshire. That's enough to keep you on the main stage these days. And on top of the fact that in that last debate, he kind of stood out. He kind of cut through the crap when those 3 senators were debating a bill up in front of everyone, and everybody's eyes are glazing over. Rand Paul hasn't done that. Carla Fiorina hasn't done that. John Kasich, he's kind of the opposite of Rand Paul. He's the opposite of him on domestic policy, and he's the opposite of him on foreign policy. And once again, he's out of step with where I think Republicans are. Where Republicans are, and the average Republican is less conservative than I am, is somewhere between Rand Paul and John Kasich, both on domestic and foreign policy. And what you find between that are the Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie. They're between those extremes. Carly Fiorina is between those extremes. The problem is that she just hasn't been able to latch onto it. I think she's right on the positions, but just hasn't been able to get any traction whatsoever. But for Rand Paul, he has no one to blame but himself. He got started off kind of slow, went after Donald Trump, which at the time I knew was a mistake. Should just stay away from the guy. Rand, I don't agree with you all the time, but whatever you got to sell, just keep selling it. And he kind of got off on this tangent. I think he convinced himself that he could take Donald Trump out early, and that was wrong. And it was something that I predicted in July before the first debate. The thing is, stay away from the guy. And I still preach that today. If I was giving an opinion to any of those candidates, I'd say stay away from Donald Trump. You're not going to be able to take him out the way you think. Donald Trump, as has been proved in the rest of his life, he will undermine himself. If it's going to happen, he will do the undermining. Just keep selling. Just keep being a good person, good speaker. Stick to what your talking points are. Look like the true adult on stage, and you'll be fine. The problem is that when Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and Rand Paul get into these arguments back and forth, they don't look like adults. They look like they forget that they're on stage, and it's like they're in the cloakroom at Congress, the coat room, or whatever they call that place, where everybody gets to put their jackets before they come out onto the floor. I hear that place exists. They sound like they're having an argument where nobody's watching. That's what that looked like. And that doesn't help any of them. That only helps somebody like Donald Trump. But Rand Paul, no junior debate for him, which probably means he'll probably be dropping out because his numbers are just not worth sticking around on. Let's move on to something else before I go. Still got a few minutes. Black Lives Matter. In any of these movements, you can take what you believe too far. That goes for both the right and the left. And when you start losing contact with what Americans in their daily lives care about, you start to undercut what you're doing. And Black Lives Matter is showing that. It's not enough for them, and I know it's a political movement. I know that it has no basis in any sort of facts or anything out there. And you know what? Most people don't care. I wish they did care, but they don't. However, people do start to care when you get in the way of people going to do their shopping at Mall of America, which is, if you didn't hear about this, Black Lives Matter tried to shut that place down by showing up there, and the police showed up, kicked them out. Likewise, Black Lives Matter, group of them, they showed up on the 405 in LA within the last few days, shut down traffic, shut down that interstate. Once again, police had to show up. There is no quicker way for a group, once again, whether a right-leaning group or a left-wing group, to get on the wrong side of the general populace of the United States when you start shutting down places where they shop and the roads that they use. That the Black Lives Matter crowd doesn't care about that and maybe doesn't know that tells you something. It should tell you that already it's way outside of its bounds. See, somebody like Jesse Jackson, even though I'm sure that he identifies with Black Lives Matter just fine, and Al Sharpton and the rest of those race baiters, you'll never see Jesse Jackson getting his people out to shut down a highway in L.A. That is how Jesse Jackson has been able to stay around for as long as he has as a guy who extorts companies. What's he do? He chooses one company. Al Sharpton just picks one company. Doesn't go after the whole industry. Doesn't go to a store where those products are sold to shut down a mall. These guys are very strategic. And they know the tactics to use where they can stay in power. They can get their money under the table and still be able to continue to make a living off of that. Even though I know they're wrong, but that's how they do it. They know shutting down a highway just ticks people off. Doesn't matter. People will not care what the issue is. It could be children dying of cancer. You shut down a highway, people are going to get ticked off. They don't care if it's like a breast cancer awareness thing. You shut down a mall where people can't get in to shop, people are going to be ticked off. Black Lives Matter, and this is one of those issues that it's kind of like Donald Trump. You just got to let him do his thing, hoping that he undermines himself eventually. With Black Lives Matter, it may be kind of the same thing. Yes, you want to stop them if they get out on the highway. You got to take them to jail, malls. But I think this shows that eventually they're just going to wear people's welcome out. Both black people, white people, Hispanics, Asians, all of them. Because they so badly want attention. Because that's the only reason they're out there. They know going to Mall of America and trying to shut it down, that's going to get them attention. Not looking at the long-term ramifications of that. Shutting down a highway is good for that day. All it does is tick people out. It's not going to bring anybody to think like Black Lives Matter does. So maybe in some of these cases, we just have to wait these groups out. I know that can be hard. But I think that's what these most recent cases show. But I got to go. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I'll talk to you again on Monday night. Merry Christmas.